Assalamu alaikum. I am Birji Sapti and this is your first history class. The topic that I have chosen for today's class is the British East India Company, their arrival in the Indian subcontinent and the involvement that they had later on in India. British were not the first European country who decided to come to the Indian subcontinent. Before them, there were many other European countries who had come to India. As you already know, you must have know that the people who had come before the British, the Portuguese were the first one who had come to India in the second half of the 15th century, and they had established themselves. Why did these European countries wanted to come to the Indian subcontinent? That we know that Indian subcontinent at that time was ruled by the Mughal Empire. Though when Portuguese came to India, Mughals were not ruling, but the news of the profitable trade, the wealth of India had a lot to invite those European countries to itself. These European countries already have discovered the new sea route to the Indian subcontinent, to the Indian Ocean, and the trade items available there, especially the spices. Also, these spices were a major attraction. Other than that, there was silk and cotton cloth and indigo and saltpeter, many other trade commodities. Those were in great demand in the European countries. And these European countries also had established and built very powerful navies. They had become, Portuguese themselves had become the greatest power of the world, and the other European nations who came to India also had very strong navies. And so it was, all these things were supporting the idea that they should go and explore the rich countries in the east of African continent. British, when they came to India, they came to establish their trade in spices. Many questions arise here. When British came to India, they came under the umbrella of the British East India Company. So we see that when we study this subject in detail, we see that there are a number of questions that arise here. And I would like to examine the factors that were responsible for the British to decide to come to India, and I will do it in the following stages. Number one question is, what was the British East India Company? Question number two is, why did they decide to come to the Indian subcontinent? As we already have said, we also need to explore this factor in detail, that what were the reasons why they decided to come to the Indian subcontinent. Question number three, what were the difficulties or problems that they faced when they arrived in India, and how did they deal with those problems? Number five, why did they decide to expand further and to grow in political influence or power in the Indian subcontinent? They came as traders. They could just conduct their trade and earn money from this lucrative trade. But they decided to grow their political power. They decided to take part in the politics of India. Why did they do so? And last question is, what were the strategies that they used to strengthen their control of India? These are the questions that need answers, and we should explore them. So I will explore them in detail. I will examine them in detail, and also dissect the topic in depth. Okay. Now, what was the what is the English East India Company or British East India Company? We see that the British East India Company was the trading company of England. Some group of merchants or the traders, they decided to set up this trading company in 1600. Queen of England supported this idea. She granted the charter and also the monopoly of trade to the officials of British East India Company. These merchants were given the permission by the Queen, and a monopoly of trade was granted to them, which meant that they could trade. This East India Company was the only company from England which could trade in the countries with the countries east of Africa, okay, in the Indian Ocean. They decided to launch their trade in spices, and they wanted to do it with the East Indies in spice land. East Indies at that time was Indonesia and these countries of Southeast Asia. They were very rich in spices, and spices were in great demand in Europe at that time. So they decided to start their trade in the East Indies. When they went there, when they were not received in a good way, because the trade there was already in control, had been taken control of some other European nations like Dutch were very strong there. They were controlling the trade, they were running their business successfully, and they would not allow any other country to come and take away their business or their trade. They did not want to give any share in their trade to any of the other companies. So Dutch and East India Company was running the business there, and that is why the British could not establish their foothold there. Okay, what would they do next? They decided to turn their attention to the Indian subcontinent. So when they came to India, already you know that in the second half of the 15th century, Portuguese had established themselves in this Indian subcontinent, and they were very powerful, very influential, and had a lot of goodwill with the emperor himself, and had the support and patronage of the ruling family or the Mughal emperor. Jahangir was the Mughal emperor at that time, and so when they reached there, this was the port of Surat where they first landed, but they could not establish their trade. They could not get the trade permission from the Mughal emperor. They could not get any concession or any trade agreement signed with the Mughal emperor, because all the trade and was controlled by the Portuguese, and Portuguese actually were controlling the Indian Ocean on the behalf of the Mughal Empire. So it was not easy. British had to do a lot of things to get things done for themselves. What would they do now? They used different diplomatic strategies. British East India Company established its first port in the coastal city of Madras and Bombay. And they also kept trying, sending in the Mughal emperor different kinds of precious gifts and the letters from the king and many other things that they were doing, but they were successful to get the first permission granted to them, or a kind of limited trade agreement signed with the governor of Gujarat. Prince Khurram was the governor of Gujarat in 1612 they came to the port of Surat. 1618 they got the limited trade treaty signed with the governor of Gujarat, Prince Khurram, and this is how they started their trade with the Indian subcontinent. All these European countries were very firm in their belief that they had to stay in the Indian subcontinent because of the opportunities, trade opportunities, and also there was a lot of ego and prestige involved. Like all these were like Dutch, French, Portuguese and English. All they were commercial rivals, and they had to compete with their rivals. Okay. The difference between the British East India Company and the other companies like the French East India Company was that the difference that actually made a lot of difference for the company, English company, was that they had the complete support of their government in England. They supported, British government supported and patronized everything that was done by British East India Company. Actually, the policies were devised according to the will of the British government, and that was the major factor that eventually led them to emerge as the sole powerful European country that could become the ruler of India. So this is how French East India Company, Dutch East India Company. After some time, Portuguese also started losing their interest in the Indian subcontinent. Although they were the last one to leave the Indian subcontinent, there was the presence of Portuguese, remained the presence of Portuguese for a long time, but they did not remain very active. In fact, like Bombay presidency or Bombay, the port of Bombay was given to the British by the Portuguese when a marriage took place between Portuguese princes and English prince. So as a result, this town of Bombay, which was a harbor, good harbor, was given in dowry to the prince, and then it was then given to the British East India Company, and this is how they used it as their another very important port, and used it for their business. Okay, so this is how they were initially. They had a lot of they had to do a lot of things. Now British were now they faced difficulties, problems from different French, Dutch and Portuguese East India Company initially, which they gradually, slowly tried to overcome these problems, and also they had to. So what they were doing that when they came, they were already a naval power. They started building up their armies also. When Aurangzeb was ruling, once these British East India Company, the company came into conflict with the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb also for some time, and when they tried to defy the treaty that they had signed with Aurangzeb, the commercial treaty, when they started defying that, and when they started like exceeding their limit, issuing their own currency, then at that time they were reprimanded by Aurangzeb, and then their agreement was suspended for some time, and they were eventually pardoned by Aurangzeb, and after they agreed to give a large sum of money to the Mughal emperor, and that is how then they were able to resume their trade. And for a long time they did not try to do anything that could be offensive to the Mughal ruling class. Okay, but after Aurangzeb, we see that Aurangzeb was busy. These Mughal emperors like Aurangzeb, we can see that he was busy fighting battle after battle, especially the last half of his life was spent on the battlefield throughout, and the campaign with Marathas. There were continuous rebellions and revolts, but the campaigns with Marathas was turned out to be very expensive in terms of resources, money, wealth of the state, and also in terms of the manpower, like a number of capable soldiers and army officers, a number of good people were lost in those battles with Marathas, and Mughal treasury almost went bankrupt. By the time Aurangzeb died, the Mughal empire had grown very, very poor. The treasury was almost empty. Aurangzeb remained in the south, away from the central government, fighting those battles, and could not return to the central government in Delhi till his death. Because of that, a lot of things were ignored, neglected, and central government grew very weak. So the company could see all these weaknesses of the increasing, growing weaknesses of the Mughal empire, and could see the potential that it offered to them in terms of increasing political power in India. Like, they could now think of doing something else. Their rivalry with the other companies also persuaded or convinced them to gain more political power, more territory. Up till now they were traders, but now after Aurangzeb they decided to turn their attention to politics also, because after Aurangzeb, weak rulers who came, corrupt and ineffective rulers who came, they were also not able to control the situation, and provinces started to break away from the central government, refused to pay taxes to the central government, and that is how the Mughal empire lost a lot of revenue, and already they had grown very weak due to these battles. So and India, when provinces broke away, then India became so weak that British East India Company could take the advantage of it too. And what they did, that they supported one ruler, Indian ruler, against the other. During when these provinces became independent, they were fighting. India divided, and these Indian rulers were enemies of each other. They wanted to gain more power for themselves, so they were fighting, and for that they needed help. So EIC helped them, and this is how, when the person, the Indian ruler who won the battle and was supported by them and won the battle, after that that Indian ruler was allowed to rule, and had to give a lot of bribes and gifts and taxes to the British indirectly. That is how they set up their rule in many of the states. This is called the subsidiary alliances, which they signed with different Indian rulers, supported them. Indian ruler was supposed to disband his army, and they had to pay to the British troops indirectly. This is how they gained control in many of the states. Then they also conquered territories and annexed them directly to their empire, like Sindh and Punjab were conquered. Then they also different strategies. This is how they used. They made a number of new laws on the basis of misgovernment. They gained many territory. Then they also fought battles against some Indian states like Calcutta and Bengal. They won the famous battle of Plassey in 1757 against Siraj-ud-Daulah, and gained the very, very wealthy province of Bengal. And it is said that the EIC, the wealth that was collected by EIC in Bengal later on was used to feed the industrialization in Britain. Then they won a battle against an alliance of Indian rulers in Battle of Buxar in 1764. They also won that battle. Punjab and Sindh 1843 and 1849, they were conquered, first Sindh and then Punjab, and were made the part of the British Empire, and they had the support of their government. And now the British government was, after 1773, was the partner with the EIC in ruling the Indian subcontinent. 1852, they introduced the famous doctrine of lapse, and in which if a ruler did not have a natural heir, he had to gave up his, after the death of the ruler, the land would be, or the territory or state would be taken over or confiscated by the British government. That they did, and almost 8 states were taken up by the British government, and this created a lot of resentment, and this eventually led up to the fighting of the War of Independence by the Indians, and British in the Company Raj remained intact till after the 1857 War of Independence. After that war, Queen Victoria became the Queen of India. The British Raj with the Mughal Raj came to its end, though they were the victorious party, but now with the complete defeat of the Mughal power, now the British ruling power or British royal family decided to take over and replace the Mughal ruling class, and they also decided to end the rule of the company, and this is how the Company Raj ended in 1857. Okay, this was all about an overview of the British arrival in the subcontinent, their stay and their growth of power in the subcontinent, also how they decided to get involved in in Indian subcontinent and set up their rule till 1858. Okay, this is all for today. Thank you very much.